The morning air was crisp as the young man walked down the street toward his part-time job. At 20 years old, he was doing his best to balance college classes with enough work to keep his small apartment. His friends often asked why he chose the longer route to work each day, but he never really explained that he enjoyed passing by the old stone church. Something about its weathered walls and the quiet garden beside it brought him peace before starting his busy day. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. The sky threatened rain, and most people hurried past with umbrellas ready, eyes fixed on the ground. But he noticed her right away, a woman sitting alone on the church steps, her hand resting on her very pregnant belly. What caught his attention wasn't just that she was pregnant, but the look on her face. It was a mixture of exhaustion and something that looked like hopelessness. He slowed his pace. He was already running late for work, and he knew his boss wouldn't be happy if he clocked in after 9 a.m. again. But something made him stop. "Are you okay?" he asked, taking a few steps toward her. The woman looked up, startled. She quickly wiped away tears he hadn't noticed until then. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice cracked on the second word. The young man hesitated. He wasn't good with strangers. His mother always told him he was too shy for his own good. But he couldn't just walk away. "Would you like some water?" he offered, pulling out the bottle from his backpack. "Or I could call someone for you." The woman shook her head. She was probably in her early 30s, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of many sleepless nights. Her clothes were clean but wrinkled, like she'd been wearing them for too long. "The church doesn't open until 10, she said finally. "I just needed to sit somewhere quiet." Raindrops began to fall, light at first, but quickly growing heavier. The young man glanced at his watch, 9:10 a.m. He was definitely late now. "There's a coffee shop just around the corner," he said, surprising himself with the words. "We could wait there until the rain stops. Or until the church opens, if that's what you'd prefer." The woman looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether he was a threat or a genuine offer of help. Finally, she nodded and slowly stood up, one hand supporting her back. They walked in silence to the coffee shop, the young man slowing his pace to match hers. Inside, the warmth and smell of fresh coffee was a welcome change from the cold rain. He ordered 2 hot drinks and guided her to a quiet table in the corner. "I'm late for work anyway," he said with a small smile. "Might as well enjoy a coffee while I face the inevitable lecture from my boss." For the first time, the woman's face softened slightly. "You'll be in trouble because of me." He shrugged. "Some things are more important than being on time." The silence that followed wasn't as uncomfortable as before. The woman wrapped her hands around the warm cup, seeming to draw strength from its heat. "I don't have anywhere to go," she said finally, her voice so quiet he almost didn't hear it over the cafe's background noise. "My boyfriend kicked me out when he found out the baby is a girl. He wanted a boy." She kept her eyes on her cup as she spoke. "I've been staying with a friend, but they can't keep me anymore." The young man listened, not knowing what to say. His own problems, a late assignment, not enough money for new shoes, his roommate's loud music, suddenly seemed small in comparison. "I heard the church sometimes helps people find places to stay," she continued. "I don't have family in this city. I don't have anyone." The young man thought about his small apartment, his tight budget, his busy schedule. He thought about his mother, who had raised him alone after his father left, who had worked 3 jobs and still made time to help others in their community. "I know some people," he said slowly. "My mom volunteers at a community center. They might know of resources, places that could help." He pulled out his phone and called his mother, stepping away from the table to explain the situation. When he returned, he had information about a women's shelter with a program specifically for expectant mothers. "They have a room available," he told her. "And they can help with medical care and finding a job. It's not perfect, but it's a start." The woman looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." The young man thought about this for a moment. "Because someone helped my mom once, when she was alone with me. And she always taught me that's what we're supposed to do, help each other when we can." By the time they finished their coffee, the rain had stopped. The young man called a rideshare to take her to the shelter, using money he'd been saving for a new textbook. Before she got into the car, the woman turned to him. "I've been feeling like the whole world had given up on me," she said. "Thank you for showing me that's not true." As he watched the car drive away, the young man texted his boss with an apology and explanation for his absence. Then he started walking toward the community center where his mother volunteered. He had a feeling this was just the beginning of something important, something that would change not only the pregnant woman's life, but his own as well. The community center was busy when the young man arrived. His mother, a small woman with kind eyes and a determined spirit, was organizing donations in the back room. She smiled when she saw him, but her expression quickly turned serious as he explained the morning's events in more detail. "You did the right thing," she said, squeezing his arm. "That shelter is good, I've referred people there before. But there's more we can do." His mother introduced him to the center's director, and together they made some calls. By the end of the day, they had gathered a list of resources: a doctor who offered free prenatal care to women in need, a legal aid service that could help with housing rights, and information about job training programs for single parents. The young man's boss had been surprisingly understanding when he called to explain his absence. "Family emergency," he had said, and somehow, it felt true. He was given an extra shift that weekend to make up for the missed hours. 3 days passed before he heard anything. He was studying in his small apartment when his phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "It's me," said the woman from the church steps. "The shelter gave me a phone. I hope it's okay that I called. She paused. "I wanted to say thank you again. And that I'm doing better." The young man smiled. "I'm glad. My mom was asking about you." "Your mom sounds amazing," the woman said. "The people here told me about all the calls she made. I have an appointment with a doctor next week." Their conversation was brief but left the young man feeling lighter somehow. Before they hung up, the woman mentioned that the shelter was hosting a community dinner that Sunday. "They said I could invite someone. If you're not busy." Sunday found the young man and his mother walking into the shelter's common room, carrying homemade cookies his mother had insisted on baking. The place was simple but warm, with mismatched furniture and colorful artwork on the walls. Several women of different ages moved around the space, some visibly pregnant, others holding small children. The woman from the church steps looked different already. Her face had more color, and though she still seemed tired, there was a new energy about her. She was helping set up the dinner table, carefully arranging plates and cups. "I got a job," she told them as they sat down to eat. "Just part-time at a bookstore, but they're okay with me taking time off when the baby comes. And they have flexible hours so I can make my doctor appointments." The young man's mother nodded approvingly. "That's wonderful. How are you feeling?" "Better," the woman said. "The doctor says the baby is healthy. I was so worried." Her voice trailed off, and she placed a protective hand on her stomach. "I wasn't taking very good care of myself before. I was too scared." As the evening progressed, the young man observed how his mother effortlessly connected with the other women, offering advice about childcare and encouragement about job interviews. He felt slightly out of place among all the women, but found himself drawn into a conversation with a shelter volunteer about the center's need for basic repairs. "I'm studying engineering," he said. "I could probably fix that leaky sink you mentioned." Before they left, he had agreed to come back the following Saturday to look at the plumbing issues. His mother beamed at him with pride. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. The young man juggled his classes, work shifts, and weekends at the shelter, where he gradually tackled various repair projects. Sometimes the woman from the church steps would keep him company, handing him tools and telling him about her day at the bookstore. "I never asked your major," she said one afternoon as he fixed a wobbly table. "What made you choose engineering?" He thought about it while tightening a screw. "I like solving problems. Taking something broken and making it work again." She nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense, considering how we met." The young man looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "I was pretty broken that day," she said simply. "Sitting on those church steps, I felt like I had run out of options. But you saw a problem and tried to fix it." The young man felt his face grow warm. "I didn't do that much." "You stopped," she corrected him. "When everyone else walked by, you stopped and asked if I was okay. That changed everything." As her due date approached, the shelter staff helped the woman prepare for the baby's arrival. The young man's mother organized a small baby shower, and his classmates, who had heard the story, contributed diapers and tiny clothes. The bookstore where she worked offered her a small room in the back to use as a nursery when she returned from maternity leave. One evening, as the young man was leaving the shelter after fixing a broken window, the woman called him back. "I have something to show you," she said, leading him to her small room. On the wall above a second-hand crib hung a simple painting of a church with rain falling around it. "I've been taking an art therapy class here. This is from that first day. I wanted to remember it." The young man stared at the painting, recognizing the stone steps where they had met. "I was thinking," the woman said, her voice careful and measured, "that when the baby comes, would you and your mom like to be there?" "Not in the delivery room," she added quickly, seeing his startled expression. "Just at the hospital. I don't have family to call, and you two have become important to me." The young man thought about how much had changed since that rainy Tuesday morning. How a simple decision to stop and help had created ripples he never could have imagined. "We'd be honored," he said. And he meant it. The call came at 2:14 a.m. on a Thursday. The young man fumbled for his phone in the darkness, his mind foggy with sleep. "It's time," said the woman's voice, tight with pain. "The shelter coordinator is driving me to the hospital." He sat up immediately, fully awake. "Which hospital?" "We'll meet you there." 20 minutes later, he and his mother rushed through the hospital entrance. The woman from the church steps was already in a delivery room, but a nurse directed them to a nearby waiting area. The young man paced while his mother sat calmly, thumbing through an outdated magazine. "Aren't you nervous?" he asked her. She smiled. "Babies come in their own time. Could be minutes, could be hours." It was hours. Dawn broke over the city as they waited, occasional updates coming from nurses who seemed touched by their presence. The young man dozed off briefly, his head against the wall, only to jerk awake with every sound from the hallway. Finally, just after 8 a.m., a nurse appeared with a broad smile. "She's asking for you both. Mother and baby are doing well." The woman looked exhausted but radiant, propped up in the hospital bed with a tiny bundle cradled against her chest. She looked up as they entered, her eyes bright with tears and wonder. "She's here," she whispered, tilting the bundle so they could see the small, wrinkled face of the newborn girl. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Perfect in every way. The young man's mother moved forward immediately, making soft cooing sounds as she peered at the baby. But the young man hung back, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. This new life, this tiny person who might never have had a safe arrival if not for a chance encounter on a rainy morning. "Do you want to hold her?" the woman asked, looking directly at him. He shook his head quickly. "I don't know how. I might drop her." The woman smiled. "I didn't know how either, until about an hour ago. Come here." Under her gentle instruction, the young man found himself carefully supporting the newborn's head as she was placed in his arms. The baby's eyes were closed, her tiny fingers curled into fists. "She's so small," he whispered, afraid to move. "But strong," the woman said. "The nurse said she has a strong grip and good lungs." As if on cue, the baby's face scrunched up and she let out a surprisingly powerful cry. The young man hastily handed her back to her mother, who laughed as she settled the infant against her chest. "Have you chosen a name?" his mother asked. The woman nodded. "Hope. Her name is Hope." In the days that followed, the young man found himself thinking often about the tiny girl and her mother. The hospital had kept them for observation due to some minor complications, but they were finally released to return to the shelter. The shelter had strict rules about visitors, especially male visitors, but made an exception for him given the circumstances. He arrived one evening with a small stuffed bear his classmates had helped him buy. The woman was sitting in a rocking chair by the window, the baby asleep in a bassinet beside her. She looked up with a tired smile when he entered. "How are you doing?" he asked, placing the bear at the foot of the bassinet. "Exhausted. Overwhelmed. Happier than I've ever been." She gestured to the chair across from her. "The shelter counselor helped me apply for additional assistance. And the bookstore owner came to visit. She's holding my job and said I can bring Hope with me when I'm ready to return." The young man nodded, pleased but not surprised. In the weeks since their first meeting, he had watched as people responded to her determination and gentle spirit, offering help and opportunities that had seemed impossible that day on the church steps. "My professor wants to feature the shelter repair project for a community engagement showcase," he said. "If that's okay with everyone here. It might bring in more volunteers and donations." "Of course it's okay," she replied. "You've done so much for this place. For us." He shook his head. "I just fixed some leaky pipes and wobbly furniture. And changed our lives." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Do you know what the shelter counselor said to me yesterday? She said that sometimes people come into our lives for a reason, exactly when we need them most. Like an answer to a prayer we didn't even know we were saying." The young man felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I wasn't trying to be anyone's answer. I just couldn't walk past you that day. That's what makes it special," she said softly. "You helped without being asked. Without expecting anything in return." The baby stirred in her bassinet, making small snuffling sounds. The woman reached over to gently rock her back to sleep. "My lease is up at the end of the semester," the young man said suddenly. "My roommate is moving in with his girlfriend, and I need to find a new place." She looked at him, waiting. "There's an apartment building not far from here. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe. 2-bedroom units available." He hesitated. "The bookstore is walking distance. And there's a daycare center nearby that offers sliding scale fees." The woman's eyes widened slightly. "Are you suggesting a roommate arrangement?" he clarified quickly. "Completely separate spaces. But you'd have help with Hope, and I could keep my savings account from being completely drained by rent." He rushed on, "My mom thinks it's a good idea. She said she'd help set up the baby's room." For a long moment, the woman just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across her face. "From strangers on church steps to potential roommates," she said. "Life takes unexpected turns. Is that a yes?" She looked down at her sleeping daughter, then back at him. "It's a, let's talk about the details. But I think it could work." As he left the shelter that evening, the young man paused to look up at the night sky. 6 weeks ago, he had been a typical college student, worried about grades and work schedules and not much else. Now he was helping plan living arrangements that would include an infant. Yet somehow, it felt right. Like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Not because of grand plans or noble intentions, but because one rainy morning, he had chosen to stop and ask a simple question: "Are you okay?" Sometimes, he was learning, that was all it took to change a life. Or two. Or three. Moving day arrived with unexpected sunshine after a week of rain. The young man had spent days preparing the apartment, painting the smaller bedroom a soft yellow and installing safety locks on the cabinets. His mother had found a crib at a thrift store and restored it with fresh paint and new bedding. The woman from the church steps, he still thought of her that way sometimes, despite knowing her name and so much more about her now, stood in the center of the living room, baby Hope asleep in a carrier against her chest. "It's perfect," she said, turning slowly to take in the modest space. The furniture was mismatched but clean, some borrowed from the young man's mother, some donated by the shelter. A small balcony overlooked a tree-lined street. "I never thought." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The young man understood what she meant. Just months ago, she had been sitting on cold church steps with nowhere to go. "Your room is this way," he said, leading her down a short hallway. "The bathroom is shared, but I fixed the shower so it doesn't drip anymore." The bedroom was small but bright, with a double bed, a dresser, and the freshly painted crib. On the wall hung the painting she had made at the shelter, the church in the rain, now framed. "You kept it," she said, surprised. "Of course," the young man replied. "It's important." Hope stirred and made small fussing sounds. The woman gently rocked her while patting her back. "I should feed her soon," she said. "And then unpack our things. There's not much, the shelter gave us a bag of clothes and baby supplies." "Take your time," the young man said. "I have class until 4, but my mom's coming by around noon to help. She's bringing lunch." Their new routine developed gradually over the following weeks. The young man attended his classes and worked part-time, while the woman cared for Hope and prepared to return to her job at the bookstore. They moved carefully around each other at first, both conscious of respecting boundaries and privacy in the shared space. The young man learned to sleep through middle of the night crying and became adept at warming bottles when the woman was exhausted. She, in turn, made sure the apartment was quiet during his study hours and occasionally left plates of food in the refrigerator with his name on them. "You don't have to cook for me," he protested one evening after finding a container of homemade soup. "I know," she replied simply. "But you've done so much for us. It's a small thing I can do in return." As Hope grew, her personality began to emerge, curious, determined, and quick to smile. The young man found himself looking forward to the moments when he returned home to find her awake, her small face lighting up at the sight of him. "She likes you," the woman observed one evening as Hope reached for him from her bouncy seat. The young man laughed as he let the baby grab his finger. "The feeling is mutual." When the woman returned to work, they adjusted their schedules so that Hope spent minimal time at daycare. The young man took morning classes and watched the baby in the afternoons while her mother worked at the bookstore. His own mother filled in the gaps, delighting in her role as an honorary grandmother. "You've built a family," his roommate from the previous year commented when he visited the apartment. "A weird, non-traditional family, but still." The young man hadn't thought of it that way, but the observation stayed with him. They weren't a family in the conventional sense, yet there was something undeniably familial about their arrangement, the shared meals, the inside jokes, the way they automatically pitched in when the other was struggling. One evening in early autumn, the woman returned from work to find the young man sitting on the living room floor, engineering textbooks spread around him, with Hope asleep on his chest. "She wouldn't settle," he whispered. "And I have a test tomorrow." The woman smiled as she set down her bag. The ultimate multitasking. She carefully lifted the sleeping baby, but instead of taking her to the bedroom, she sat beside the young man on the floor. "I got a call from the shelter today," she said. They're organizing a holiday fundraiser and asked if we would speak at the event. About our story. The young man looked up from his textbook. Our story? How we met. How one person stopping to help led to all of this. She gestured around the apartment. They think it might inspire people to donate or volunteer. The young man was quiet for a moment. I never did anything special. That's what makes it special, she countered. You didn't set out to be a hero or change someone's life. You just showed basic human kindness when I needed it most. He thought about the months since that rainy morning. About the woman who now sat confidently beside him, so different from the desperate person on the church steps. About baby Hope, sleeping peacefully, with a future full of possibilities. Okay, he said. We can tell our story. She smiled. I've been thinking about what I'll say. About how sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest moments. How you never know when holding the door for someone or offering a kind word might be the thing that gives them hope to keep going. Hope stirred in her sleep, making the little sighing sound they both found endearing. My professor says engineering is about solving problems, the young man said thoughtfully. Finding solutions to make life better. I always thought that meant building bridges or designing more efficient systems. And now? Now I think maybe the most important engineering happens between people. Building connections. Creating support systems. Finding ways to help each other navigate the difficult parts of life. Outside, leaves rustled in the autumn breeze. Inside their small apartment, surrounded by textbooks and baby toys, the young man and woman sat in comfortable silence, watching over the sleeping child who had, in her own way, changed both their lives as much as they had changed hers. We should bring Hope to the church sometime, the young man said suddenly. To see where it all began. The woman nodded. I'd like that. Full circle. Hope stretched in her sleep, tiny fingers opening like stars. Two people who had been strangers just months ago watched over her together, their lives now intertwined in ways neither could have imagined on that fateful rainy morning outside the church. Winter arrived with a blanket of snow and end-of-semester exams for the young man. He studied late into the nights, often with Hope's baby monitor beside his textbooks. The woman worked extra hours at the bookstore, which was busy with holiday shoppers, and together they managed to save enough for a small Christmas tree. I've never spoken in front of people before, the young man confessed as they prepared for the shelter's fundraising event. They stood in their small bathroom, the young man awkwardly adjusting his tie while the woman gently bounced Hope on her hip. Just speak from the heart, she advised. That's what the shelter director said. People respond to authenticity. The community center hall was decorated with twinkling lights and paper snowflakes when they arrived. The young man's mother met them at the entrance, taking Hope so they could prepare for their presentation. There are at least 100 people here, the young man whispered, peering through the curtain at the crowd. Local business owners, community leaders, and regular citizens filled the chairs, their conversations creating a low hum in the room. That's good, the woman replied, though her voice betrayed her own nervousness. More people means more potential help for the shelter. When the shelter director introduced them, the young man felt his heart racing. He followed the woman onto the small stage, blinking under the bright lights. She spoke first, her voice quiet but steady as she described her situation that rainy morning, alone, pregnant, without resources or hope. I had given up, she said. I was sitting on those church steps because I didn't know where else to go. I didn't expect anyone to help me. In my experience, people walk by. They look away. They hurry past problems that aren't their own. She turned slightly toward the young man. But not everyone. Sometimes, a stranger stops and asks if you're okay. And that simple question can be the beginning of everything changing. When it was his turn to speak, the young man's nervousness faded as he focused on telling their story truthfully. He described the coffee shop, the call to his mother, the gradual way their lives had become connected. He talked about the shelter's crucial role and the community that had formed around them. "I'm an engineering student," he concluded. "We learn about structural integrity, how to build things that won't collapse under pressure. What I've discovered is that people need that too. We all need support systems strong enough to hold us when life gets heavy." He gestured to where his mother sat holding Hope. "This little girl will grow up knowing that community matters. That helping others isn't extraordinary, it's what makes us human. And that sometimes, the most important thing you can do is simply stop and notice when someone is struggling." The applause was warmer and longer than either of them had expected. Afterward, people lined up to talk to them, many writing checks for the shelter or signing up to volunteer. An elderly couple pressed an envelope into the woman's hands, explaining that they had been looking for a worthy cause to support in memory of their daughter. "You reminded us of her," the elderly woman said, her eyes moist. "She would have stopped on those church steps too." By the time they arrived home, Hope was fast asleep. The young man's mother helped tuck her into her crib before leaving with a warm hug for both of them. "You did wonderfully," she assured them. "I'm so proud of you both." When they were alone, the woman opened the envelope from the elderly couple. Her hand flew to her mouth as she pulled out a check. "This is..." She handed it to the young man, who stared at the figure in disbelief. "That's enough for..." he began, his mind racing with possibilities. "Hope's education," she finished. "They've started a college fund for her." They sat together on their worn sofa, the weight of this unexpected gift settling over them. "All because you stopped that day," she said softly. The young man shook his head. "All because you were brave enough to accept help, to keep going, to build something new." As winter deepened, their small apartment became a gathering place. The young man's classmates came for study sessions, cooing over Hope between equations. The shelter staff visited with updates and sometimes requests for the young man's repair skills. The bookstore owner brought leftover pastries from the cafe corner and news of a possible promotion for the woman. One snowy evening, as Hope practiced rolling over on a blanket in the living room, the young man received an email that made him shout in surprise. "What is it?" the woman asked, looking up from the dinner she was preparing. "Remember that community engagement showcase I told you about? With the shelter repair projects?" He turned his laptop so she could see the screen. "My professor submitted it to a national competition for engineering programs focused on social impact. We're finalists." She wiped her hands on a towel and came to read over his shoulder. "There's a scholarship award. And funding to expand the project," he added, his voice excited. "We could help more shelters, maybe even develop low-cost repair kits for community buildings." Hope gave a delighted gurgle as she successfully rolled from her back to her stomach, drawing their attention. They both applauded her achievement, the email momentarily forgotten as they celebrated this small milestone. Later, after Hope was asleep, they sat at their small kitchen table with mugs of tea, discussing the possibilities the competition might bring. "It's strange," the woman said, cupping her hands around her mug. "If you had told me a year ago that I'd be here, with a healthy baby, a job with promotion potential, a home, and a..." She hesitated, "a friend like you, I wouldn't have believed it. A year ago, I was just a student trying to get to class on time," he replied with a smile. "I had no idea my life was about to change completely." She reached across the table and briefly squeezed his hand. "Thank you. Not just for stopping that day, but for everything since. For building this life with us." Outside, snow fell softly, covering the city in a clean, white blanket. Inside their small apartment, warmth and possibility filled the spaces between them, as tangible as the steam rising from their tea. Spring arrived with fresh possibilities. Hope was sitting up now, her curious eyes tracking everything around her. The woman had received her promotion at the bookstore, becoming the children's section manager with slightly better pay and more regular hours. The young man was deep in preparations for the national competition presentation, which would take place in a neighboring city. "I've never been on a plane before," he admitted as they discussed the upcoming trip. "The university is covering the travel costs for the finalists." "You'll do great," the woman assured him. "Your project is making a real difference." What had begun as simple repairs at one shelter had expanded into a network of engineering students volunteering their skills at various community facilities. The young man had developed a training program and repair manual specifically designed for buildings operating on minimal budgets. Local businesses had begun donating materials and tools. "I wish you and Hope could come with me," he said. She smiled. "We'll be cheering for you from here. Besides, someone has to water your mother's plants while she goes with you." The young man's mother had insisted on accompanying him to the competition, proud of how her son had turned a chance encounter into meaningful community work. She had become an integral part of their support system, often watching Hope during complicated scheduling overlaps and bringing homemade meals during busy weeks. One sunny afternoon, just days before the competition trip, the young man suggested they visit the church where they had met. "Hope should see where her story began," he said. They walked slowly, Hope babbling happily from her stroller. The church looked different in the spring sunshine, less imposing, its stone walls softened by climbing roses just beginning to bloom. They sat on the same steps where their paths had crossed months earlier. "It's strange being back here," the woman said, looking around. "I was so desperate that day." The young man nodded. "I almost walked past. I was late for work, and it was raining, and I had a test later. All these little things that seemed so important. But you didn't walk past." "No." He smiled at Hope, who was reaching for a fallen flower petal. "Thank goodness." As they sat there, an elderly priest emerged from the church doors behind them. "Good afternoon," he greeted them warmly. "Beautiful day for a visit." The woman explained that they had met on these very steps the previous year. "A special place indeed, then," the priest said, his eyes crinkling with his smile. "We see many beginnings here, though we don't always get to witness where they lead." He asked about their story, listening intently as they shared the abbreviated version: the rainy morning, the coffee shop, the shelter, and eventually their shared apartment. "The church runs a community outreach program," he told them when they had finished. "We're always looking for stories to share in our newsletter. Would you mind?" Before they left, the priest blessed Hope, his weathered hands gentle on her dark curls. "May your life continue to be filled with the kindness that brought you into this world," he said softly. The competition weekend arrived quickly. The young man packed nervously, checking and rechecking his presentation materials. The woman helped him prepare, listening to his practice runs and offering feedback. "Remember to tell them about the people, not just the projects," she advised. "The repairs matter because of who they help." On the morning of his departure, she and Hope accompanied him to the airport. Hope, sensing the importance of the moment, was unusually solemn in her mother's arms. "We'll be fine," the woman assured him, seeing his hesitation at the security checkpoint. "It's just 3 days." It was the longest they had been apart since moving in together. The young man called each evening, sharing details about the competition and the other finalists. The woman sent photos of Hope with handwritten signs saying, "Good luck," and "We believe in you." The night before the final judging, their phone call lasted longer than usual. "No matter what happens tomorrow, I'm proud of what we've built," the young man said. "Not just the shelter project, but everything. Our home. Our life together." There was something in his voice that made the woman pause. "We're proud of you too," she replied carefully. "Hope keeps looking for you around the apartment." When he returned 2 days later, he carried not only the second-place trophy for his project but also a small stuffed airplane for Hope, who greeted him with excited bouncing and reaching arms. Second place comes with a grant, he explained as they celebrated with a special dinner his mother had prepared. Enough to expand the program to 5 more shelters and develop a training workshop. That's wonderful, the woman said. Will you have time with your course load next semester? He hesitated. That's something I wanted to talk to you about. One of the judges works for a non-profit that renovates community spaces. They've offered me a part-time position while I finish my degree. It would mean flexible hours, experience in my field, and better pay than my current job. You should take it, she said immediately. It's perfect for you. There's more. He took a deep breath. The lease here is up in 2 months. The woman's face fell slightly. Right. I should start looking for something Hope and I can afford on my own. Or, he said carefully, we could look for a slightly bigger place. Together. A real 3-bedroom, not this converted 2-bedroom. Somewhere with a little yard maybe, for when Hope starts walking. Surprise flickered across her face. You want to keep living together? Even with your new job and everything changing? The young man looked at Hope, who was contentedly smashing peas on her high chair tray, then back at the woman. You and Hope are family now, he said simply. The kind you choose, not the kind you're born into. I don't want to go back to life without morning babble through the baby monitor and stepping on toy blocks in the hallway. The woman was quiet for a moment, her eyes suspiciously bright. Hope would miss you, she finally said. And so would I. His mother, who had been pretending not to listen from the kitchen, called out, well, that's settled then. I saw a nice little house for rent near the community center. 3 bedrooms, fenced backyard, need some work but nothing my son can't handle. They all laughed, the tension broken. Later, after Hope was asleep and his mother had gone home, they sat on their small balcony watching the stars appear. Do you ever wonder, the woman asked softly, how different our lives would be if it hadn't rained that day? If you'd taken another route to work? If I'd chosen another church to sit in front of? The young man considered this. I believe we would have found each other somehow, he said finally. Maybe not that day, but sometime. Some people are meant to be part of your story. She smiled at this, her face peaceful in the growing darkness. I think you're right. The little house near the community center became their home over the next year. Just as the young man's mother had predicted, it needed work, peeling wallpaper in the kitchen, a leaky roof over the back porch, ancient plumbing that groaned in protest when the shower ran too long. But with each repair, each improvement, the house transformed from a rental into their home. Hope took her first steps in the small backyard, wobbling determinedly from the young man to her mother while they cheered her on. The fence kept her safe as she explored the grass and discovered bugs and flowers with wide-eyed wonder. They planted a vegetable garden together, the young man building raised beds that were easy for Hope to reach as she grew. The woman's position at the bookstore continued to evolve. She started a popular weekly storytime session, her gentle voice and patient manner drawing children from around the neighborhood. The store owner, impressed by her dedication, sponsored her to take online business courses, mentioning the possibility of partnership down the road. I never thought I'd have a career, she confided to the young man one evening as they sat on their new porch swing. Before, I was just trying to survive each day. The young man's work with the nonprofit flourished alongside his studies. He was on track to graduate with honors, with job offers already coming in from firms impressed by his community work. His shelter repair initiative had been featured in a national magazine, bringing attention and resources to the cause. Life settled into comfortable patterns. The young man's mother joined them for Sunday dinners, often bringing her friends from the community center. The shelter staff visited with updates on families they had helped. Hope grew into a curious, kind-hearted toddler who called the young man uncle, but treated him as a constant, essential presence in her life. On Hope's second birthday, they held a small party in the backyard. The young man had built her a tiny playhouse painted in cheerful colors, complete with window boxes for the flowers she loved to water with her miniature watering can. The woman had baked a cake shaped like the teddy bear he had brought to the hospital the day Hope was born. As their guests mingled in the yard, the young man found himself standing beside the elderly priest from the church, who had become a friend over the months. "Quite a journey from those rain-soaked steps," the priest observed quietly. The young man nodded, watching as Hope toddled between guests, accepting birthday wishes with shy smiles. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it myself. You know," the priest said thoughtfully, "people often think that changing a life requires grand gestures or extraordinary resources. But most true change begins with something much simpler, one person seeing another, really seeing them, and choosing to help." Later that evening, after the guests had gone and Hope was asleep surrounded by new toys, the woman joined the young man on the porch. She handed him a small wrapped package. "It's not my birthday," he said, surprised. "It's been exactly 2 years since we met," she explained. "I wanted to mark the occasion." Inside the box was a key on a simple silver keychain, engraved with the date they had met on the church steps. "I don't understand," he said, turning the key over in his hand. "I already have a key to the house." She smiled. "It's symbolic. 2 years ago, you offered me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. You unlocked doors I thought were permanently closed to me. This is just a reminder that home isn't just about having a roof over your head, it's about having people who see you, who choose you, who stay." The young man was quiet for a moment, turning the key over in his palm. "I've been thinking about the future," he finally said. "After I graduate next month." She waited, her face calm but attentive. "I've had some job offers. Good ones, with engineering firms in other cities." A flicker of something, concern, perhaps, crossed her face, but she nodded. "That's wonderful. You deserve every opportunity. But I've decided to accept the position with the nonprofit," he continued. "They're expanding their community renovation program statewide. The pay isn't as high as the corporate offers, but it matters more." Relief softened her features. "You'll be amazing at that work. It suits who you are." "There's more," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He pulled out a small box, similar to the one she had just given him. Inside was another key. "I know we've created an unconventional family," he said carefully. "And it works for us. But I want you to know that I'm committed to this, to you and Hope, for the long haul. This key is to a small office space near the bookstore. I've rented it for you to start that children's literacy program you've been talking about. The one the bookstore doesn't have room for." Tears filled her eyes as she took the key. "How did you know I was serious about that?" "I've only mentioned it a few times." "I listen," he said simply. "The way you listened when I talked about the shelter repairs before anyone else thought it mattered. Sometimes that's the most important gift we can give each other." They sat together as twilight deepened into night, the sounds of the neighborhood, distant laughter, a dog barking, a car passing, creating a gentle backdrop to their silence. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" she asked finally. "In the rain, on the church steps?" The young man thought back. "I asked if you were okay." 3 simple words, she said softly. "But they changed everything. They made me feel visible when I thought I had disappeared." From inside the house came the sound of Hope stirring briefly before settling back to sleep. 2 sets of ears tuned to her smallest sounds, 2 hearts connected to hers. "I used to wonder why you stopped that day," she continued. "When no one else did." The young man considered this. "I think we all have moments that define us, crossroads where we can choose to look away or to reach out. I'm just grateful that I made the right choice that morning." She leaned her head against his shoulder as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Not just the right choice, she corrected gently. The choice that revealed who you already were. In the small house behind them, a child slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that she was loved. In the quiet neighborhood around them, other lives unfolded, some connected to theirs through the shelter, the church, the community center, the bookstore, a web of relationships that had grown from one rainy morning encounter. And on the porch, two people who had once been strangers sat side by side, keys to shared futures in their hands, the story of how they met already becoming the foundation of the story they continue to write together each day.